Hello guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. So today I want to share with you a few things that I've got from Joe Pass. Joe Pass is one of the granddaddies of jazz guitar, and he's fortunately released a couple of educational DVDs, which luckily nowadays you can pretty much watch for free on YouTube. But every now and then I find myself going back to these DVDs and just trying to reabsorb some of this knowledge. And I want to share with you today some of the things that I keep coming back to in those DVDs. So here's 10 things I got from Joe Pass. So the first thing here, which is probably one of the most important things that I understood from watching Joe Pass's DVDs and just generally listening to him playing, is the role of the guitarist in the band. So Joe says that our job as the guitarist is not to play the chords, it is to feed ideas to and from the other members of the band. So using techniques like call and response, listening to what other people are doing and playing an appropriate response to it, and likewise creating an interesting enough kind of hooky call yourself that other members of the band can play off. Just thinking about it that way will completely revolutionize your chord playing and comping. Secondly, Joe's idea of time. Now, he says a lot of stuff in the DVD in a kind of throwaway fashion. One of them is this. He says, always count 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know why. So obviously what he's getting at here is he's realized how important a strong sense of connection to the time is as a player, and throughout the DVDs you can hear his foot tapping really aggressively. He's really smashing his foot on the floor to try and stay as connected as possible to the time. Number 3 is music theory. So Joe says, I don't bother with music theory because it confuses me, is exactly how he puts it. Now, of course, a lot of players talk about not knowing music theory, but really what they mean is they don't know the academic terms for the things they do. They pick things up by doing them, pick up passively by just playing lots, but they couldn't tell you the certain name of a particular scale or a superimposition or whatever it is. And there's a lot of times in these DVDs where Joe is like stumbling over his words and he can't remember the right name for something, which nowadays most of us as teenagers know far more theory than Joe Pass does in this DVD. But of course the point is that Joe Pass can apply all the stuff and he's a total beast, whereas we know all the posh names and things for stuff, but we just can't play very well. Number 4, stick to the basics. Joe says that most players use the same basic chord shapes and bar forms because they sound good. He recommends we really nail these basic chord shapes. Things like your major 7s, your major 6s, your minor 6s, minor 7s, and dominant 7s, as well as things like our minor 7 flat 5s and altered chords. So just sticking to the basic shapes that we all know and love and really mastering using them, rather than worrying about coming up with ridiculously complex voicings, which really in the flow of things are just going to put you off and trip you up, rather than contribute to that call and response of the band. Number 5, Joe says that everything he plays comes from a bar. Now, what he means by that, it's kind of Joe's interpretation of the caged system, and he demonstrates playing a chord shape, for example, this E shape, using the E shape for an A chord, and playing around it. So he's really thinking about chord shapes and visualizing those on the neck. Now, I'll often use this as a reference to my students because I've noticed a lot of guitarists say this, where they just see chord shapes on the neck. And so I say everyone from Joe Pass to Tim Miller has talked about this as a visualization tool. So pretty much every single style of playing, you can imagine going all the way from Joe Pass up to Tim Miller, this technique can come in handy. So learn to see chords on the neck, work on your comping to help you visualize your chords better, and that will inevitably improve your lead playing. So number 6 is Joe talks about don't play a chord with 4 fingers that you could play with 2. And he uses a lot of open strings in his playing where they're available to him. So even though I've just given you the example of this as an A chord using the E shape, Joe might play it like this instead, using the open A string. Maybe we'll make this an A7 chord and we'd have the G on the 5th fret of the D string and C sharp on the 6th fret of the G string. And you'd stick to a simple shape like that rather than having to use 4 fingers. So wherever possible, strip back and use an open string. Do be careful, the tone of the open strings can be different, so you have to change your approach to playing them, otherwise they can stick out quite a bit. Number 7 is the altered scale. So Joe likes to use the altered scale in a blues to get from chord 1 to chord 4. So let's take a blues in B flat. We'd have B flat major, and then the 4 chord would be E flat major. So when we get to bar, depending on how you time it, but bar 3 or bar 4 of the 12 bar blues, we've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That movement to get from 2-5-1. Joe likes to use the altered scale there, which in this instance, depending on how you like to think of it, you can just think of it as a scale in its own right, or in this instance it would be B melodic minor, which would be something along these lines. That sort of sound, so we're using B melodic minor. Get us to the 4 chord. So number 8 is the way that Joe likes to approach that harmonically, that same movement from the 1 to the 4, which is to go through a small little progression that he says he finds himself falling back into time and time again. So again, from that B flat, to move from the B flat to the E flat, we would have B flat major 7, C minor 7, C minor sus, B flat dominant 7. So that'll be B flat major 7, C minor 7, C minor 7 sus, B flat 7. Number 9 is using diminished chords as dominant chords. So we've talked about this a lot before on the channel. It's very closely tied in with the way Barry Harris talks about harmony, but basically we can use a diminished chord built on the 3rd degree of a dominant chord, and that fully implies the dominant specifically with the flat 9 degree. So let's stick with our example of B flat 7 going to E flat. We could have B flat major 7, and then when we want our dominant sound we'd go to D diminished, because D is the 3rd degree of B flat. And finally, I think we're on number 10 now, scales. Joe says don't play scales from root to root, because otherwise they just end up sounding like scales. So basically what he's implying here is start to look at modes and inversions of scales is another way to think about that, and run scales from one note to a different note. If we just go like B flat major again, that just ends up sounding like a scale. Whereas maybe if we stop on the 6th degree and then go off into an arpeggio or something different, it suddenly becomes part of a line. And Joe often interchanges the word line and scales, but he's very clear about saying don't play scales, I suppose in the classical way, running it through root to root. Now this list could pretty much go on forever. I'm that sad person who, when I sit and watch a masterclass or a DVD, I actually make notes. And I have, I've digitized them recently, and I have pages and pages on Notion about just the Joe Pass DVDs. I've got pages and pages about Pat Metheny interviews, Wynton Marsalis interviews, you name it, I've sat and watched it. And so hopefully these 10 can get you started. They're not necessarily the best Joe Pass tips or anything like that. It's just impossible to sift through them because every single thing he says is total gold. But hopefully there's enough there to get you started and pique your interest enough to go and watch these DVDs for yourself. So one of these DVDs is called The Blues Side of Jazz, and the other one is called Jazz Lines. So check those out and you'll see that picking 10 is pretty much impossible. Anyway, I hope you found that one useful. If you did, please do give it a like, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and share with any of your friends who you think might benefit from these 10 tips too. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers!
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. A drip, drip, but drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out, and I heard you find it difficult to cope well. You